Build a life worth living. 360 success. 360 success.
Welcome back to 360 Success Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Knight.
I'm Amy.
Joined by my wife, Amy, today. And 32 years we've been.
And I still have to introduce myself.
No, I think most people that have watched the podcast before know who you are. But today we've talked about some deep stuff so far, I think, when it comes to marriage, relationship. But as I've said openly, and we don't hide the fact that we've had issues like everyone else, and maybe not just like everyone else, but you don't get through 32 years without having some serious, I used to call them road bumps, but they're like huge potholes. They like knock the wheels off your vehicle, if you will. And so that big one for us was the desire to build a family and not being able to do that, and which was infertility. And that challenged us in ways that we could not comprehend going into it, wouldn't you say?
That would be very fair.
So what was, like, just to start us out, our goal when we got married, we had talked about having a family, and our goal was to have a child or start trying at about 3 years into marriage because we wanted to solidify things in our relationship, right?
Right.
And then so we started trying, and
Took 2 years, I think,
2.5
to get pregnant with Josh and I.
Yeah. And so we're like, phew. And we had, I mean, at that point we were worried, and we talked to your OB, and
Well, and I had, before we even started trying, which I don't know how TMI, but I had ovarian cyst previously, and that caused a lot of pain, discomfort, very heavy periods. And so then once I had Josh, which was a fairly easy pregnancy, easy delivery, best baby ever. And then we started trying again.
Yeah, because we thought, we'll wait a couple years and then we'll try again. We got pregnant once, we'll do it again.
Right. And then it just never happened. And I think we started with, traditional or homeopathic. I did a
temperature method to know where you're ovulating.
When I was regularly getting adjusted, we did all that we could in that realm first.
We did nutritional detox stuff.
Yes.
And it just wasn't happening.
No. And I think the bigger issue was that I don't know how else to describe it besides my soul, like not my gut, but like everything in me said that I was supposed to have another one. And you're like, you know what? I think we're good with one. In fact, I don't know what episode that was, but we referred to it about maybe once or twice about the damn bike. That's when he bought the damn bike, which is a 2-passenger vehicle, by the way. Anyway, so that was a nail in the coffin.
Or a spike in the heart.
Yes, for sure. A little salt.
Because you thought he's given up.
Salt on the wound.
But let's get into that process of kind of what that, if people have been through it, then they're acutely aware of how, I mean, if you have a romantic or a spontaneous marriage and stuff like that, and you're going through fertility treatments, which we finally led up to, that takes all of that out because everything is so clinical and so scheduled and urgent. I mean, it is.
And you have to perform on demand.
Oh my God, it's so stressful because we did artificial insemination. I don't know how long. I mean, so we waited a couple years. We tried again. We couldn't get pregnant. We kept trying. Did that for maybe a couple years.
Hormone shots in my legs.
Yeah, we started all the hormone injections, all the pills, all the things.
Which, by the way, makes you crazy.
Yes. So that adds to the stress. And remember, we're still self-employed and we have one child. We have, a nephew that we're raising too, our oldest. But again, we wanted to have another baby. And as a man, I can tell you that you feel like you're just not enough, or you're worried that it's you're not performing, or whatever the situation is. Is it me, potency wise? And so you go through all the testing, you get all that stuff checked. And then, they also are checking hormone levels and doing ultrasounds to see when you ovulate and if you're ovulating. And when we figured out that you weren't ovulating regularly. You had regular cycles, but you just weren't ovulating.
Well, and might I mention that this was 3 years ago, and technology and apps and all of that were not available. And so it was all like calendar and
take your temperature and write down every day.
Like you said, I mean, it totally takes out the relationship. It almost becomes robotic.
It's a chore. I mean, you're just checking off the list to get the stuff done with the hopes of having another child.
Yes. So, and then as any of you listeners know, trying to do this with a toddler is not very convenient. He loved his mama. And then once we got to, I forgot his name, but once we got to him, you know, we literally,
specialist, we went to Plano first, the first one we went to.
Yeah, we literally had to do the, in an exam room on the floor.
Anywhere we could, basically, because they wanted a fresh sample right then. And that is, I mean, it's humiliating and it's very difficult,
distracting,
to perform.
Stressful.
There's no lock on the door. I mean, it was
burns.
It was horrible, but
yeah. And then you come out of the office and everybody's like, I know what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And then you try to laugh it off, but then you get back and the results are it didn't take or it didn't work over and over.
Yeah, I don't even know how many times we did that, but a lot. About 2 years of fertility. Yeah, we ended up going with 2 different doctors, and it was.
I was going to talk about too, you know, during that time that you remember I said it was like my soul, like this empty hole is what it was. And the only thing I can maybe liken it to, I've never lost a child, but I did lose my dad when I was 12. And so the grief, that was kind of what it felt like, that grief hole, wound, whatever. And then it started to affect me where I couldn't, at church, they'd have baby dedications.
Oh, that was
or
horrible.
Mother's Day, or all my friends.
Hand out roses on Mother's Day. She couldn't go to church. She would get up. I mean, they announced they're having a baby dedication. She'd have to leave and she'd be crying. And I mean, the desire of her heart was to have another child. And it just wasn't happening. And, you know, it feels like a cruel joke almost. Like, you gave me the desire, but nothing's happening, and we're doing everything that we can.
Well, and I remember sitting in our backyard at night, looking at the stars and just literally just crying and kind of yelling at God. And not that I wasn't grateful for our boys at all. You know, I felt like we were very honored and they were gifts. I just still had this desire that I couldn't understand why it was there so strong. And so then we started this thing where he kind of started moving on. Like, see, it was just not meant to be. And so let's just go on. Let's just get past it.
Yeah. I mean, I was just getting to the point where I always had this thing where I wanted to be done having kids by the time I'm 35 because I don't want people to think I'm their grandpa when I'm their dad. Selfish as it may sound, that's the truth. And we're going to tell you the truth on this podcast. I'll just tell you that. And so I had mentally started preparing. I'm like, what if this doesn't happen? You know, I would say that to you and you would, you know, start crying. You're like, how could God give me this desire, but not give me a child?
And you know,
well, let's also go back to, you said you never lost a child, but you in fact had multiple miscarriages from the injection. Well, I know that as a clinician that you 100% did, because you would, you know, you might be a little bit late. We would think you were pregnant. And then all of a sudden you would have this huge menstrual cycle. Best way to put that.
There you go.
And you were like, it's so heavy. There's so many clots, there's all this stuff. And I'm like, you know, you're likely having a miscarriage. So, you know, if you were pregnant, you weren't very far along, but several times. And that could have been some of the medication stuff too. But so it's just, you know, it's gut. Every month is like a buildup and a disappointment, a buildup and a disappointment. And you go through that. And so eventually for me, I was just like, it's hard to keep doing this. And the hardest part is seeing you, what it does to you and your heart every single time. But man, all the hormones going on, all the emotion that is so raw during those times. I don't know that we've ever verbally attacked each other like that.
Mm.
And I don't know if we'll talk about some of the situations there, but I know that in those years, I've never, I mean, people know how much I love you, but during that time, I can tell you, and I can probably speak for you too. I mean, you can speak for yourself. We did not feel very in love with each other. Matter of fact, we hated each other. That's just the honest truth. I mean, if we weren't trying to have a baby together, we probably wouldn't even have spoke to each other. There was so much resentment and bitterness, especially when I started emotionally preparing to, if this doesn't happen, we're just gonna have to move on. And that really drove a wedge and started creating distance between us. I mean, you could feel that,
Well, yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
And did that feel like I was just giving up, or how did that make you feel?
Well, yeah, because and then again, that was another question for me to ask God about, how, again, could you give me this desire and yet I can't get pregnant, and now my husband's just gonna, move on and get over it like it's like a bad chapter in a book, just flip through it.
What else is going on in your mind and heart during that time?
Well, and I had to get to the point in my brain that, okay, it's not going to happen. And how am I going to recover from that loss of sorts, right? And then I have always been one of those people who loves kids. Always.
And very gifted with kids. If you know her, you know that she's a natural. I mean, it's just, that's, matter of fact, I've told you multiple times, when you met Kyron, that was one of the things that made me fall in love with you, is how, he's mixed, if you don't know that. And so the fact that you loved him no matter what, like we did, and like my family did, and that you immediately engaged, and kids are just drawn and attracted to you. And I mean, I get choked up talking about it, but you reminded me of my mother, how she's always loved kids no matter what. I mean, it didn't matter color, didn't matter anything. I mean, just that heart. And so when I saw that in you, I mean, I was just in love immediately.
Well, and then, it's kind of a joke, but I'd say, if I see a kid in Walmart and the parents would be willing, I'd take them. It didn't matter to me, like you said, where they came from, what their socioeconomic, the color of their skin. I'd be like, come on, come to my house. And so, in my mind, and I come from a blended large family, and we didn't ever call each other step, half, whatever. And so for me, in my brain, the next natural step was adoption. And I already knew that you did not want to go that way. Because we had struggled with Kyron, because he was mixed. And in that time period, there were not a lot of mixed couples. And so, if he was with us for a weekend and he's sitting in the cart at the grocery store, people would look at me with disdain, thinking I was his mom and had slept with a black man. And how dare you? That look.
Yeah, it's not that way now, but you think in the late 80s, early 90s, that things were different, and we didn't feel that way, never felt that way. But and it wasn't the thing about adoption. I mean, Kyron's always been family, but
yes, he struggled with identity between our family and his extended family, and the attachment.
For me, we talk about adoption, though. My struggle was, you say I wasn't for adoption, is I just had this fear that I could not love someone else's child like they were our own, like the other boys, right? And so that was my biggest fear. And you got to remember, I mean, we're people of faith. Through these years, we're praying still, and I mean, we would want to punch each other, but we would hold hands and pray for each other. And I'm not trying to make us sound super holy, because we don't do that all the time like we should. But I mean, I can remember times, I don't remember if you remember in the sunroom when we had our little living room deal down there, and you were laying on the couch, you were just crying, you were watching something on TV, and I don't even know what I said, and we just started arguing, and I just left the house. I mean, not like got my car and drove off, left, but like, I'm not violent, but I never wanted to attack you before. But like I said, it's so raw and so personal. It's not like it's an issue that we've been trained to deal with, and we put that across the table and we address it. It's here. And it was, man, that's why I call it the dark years, because it was. And so the last doctor's visit, I'm just going to full confession time. We were seeing a guy down at Baylor, and he was very specific about his sample and how things had to be done, and no help, if you know what I'm talking about. The other doctor's like, no, she can come in and help or whatever. But no, they put me back in a room with the stupid videos and magazines, and I'm sitting in there just going, no, I don't do this. This is not. And, this was a new guy, so you were hopeful and kind of halfway cheerful. So, but it was 45 minutes or an hour later when I make it down to the car, and you immediately jump on me, and you're remember what you said? But it wasn't like that. It was like, my God, what took you so long? And so it was.
And you said.
And I said,
this is the last time.
I'm going to quote this. And so we're going to have to make this episode. And I said, this is the last doctor's office that I will be beating off in. I mean, that's exactly what I said.
Quote unquote.
Yeah. Because, and you're like, well, what does that mean? And then the fight started. I mean, it was because we had not talked about it. We had not talked about stopping. But I'm like, I said, God's got to have a plan, but this is not it. It is not working. We've been doing this for years. And it was horrible. And you're like, you can't make that decision. And what did I say? Maybe something smart aleck like I just did. And yeah. And I might as well have, at that point, just taken your heart and thrown it on the ground. Yeah, that was a long ride home from Baylor downtown Dallas. And they were crying, and I don't even remember half.
Gnashing of teeth.
Yeah, wailing and gnashing of teeth. But I just remember when we got to the exit off the highway, and I stop, and you look at me and like, I don't even remember what you said so much of, then why do I still have this desire to have a child? How dare you make that decision for us? And this is the worst thing I have ever said to you to this day. And it is still like, when the words come out of my mouth when I'm telling people about it, it pains me. And I just like cringe, because that's how raw it was. That's how much. And I took everything you could take into and try to make my point and make it sting. And I just looked at you and I said, did you ever stop to think that, because listen, it was an emotional train wreck for 2 years. And I said, and I looked right her in the eyes and I said, did you ever stop to think that maybe God hasn't given us another child because he doesn't think you can emotionally handle one? Man. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth and the look on your face, it was emotionally heated. But I thought, what have I done? You cannot unsay things like that. And you can't undo. I mean, time will heal that, and seeing a change of heart.
How long has that been?
It's a long time. 16 years now, or 17. And then it was still bad, but something started to shift. I was praying. I said, God, I know you've got a plan, and I don't feel like this is it. There's got to be another way. And so we'd gone all summer doing this stuff. And then it was in the fall, I guess. And then winter came, or we'd started counseling, I guess, maybe that fall. And then we were watching that special by Faith Hill.
Oh, that first.
That was the first thing.
Oh, okay. I thought it was The Blind Side first.
No, it was A Home for Christmas. And she was featuring all these stars that had been adopted. And Faith Hill was adopted. So all these people, I think John Legend was on there. And
it was around Wendy's.
Dave Thomas Foundation.
Right.
And so there's that. And you and I are sitting there watching this Christmas special on TV and crying. And then we go watch The Blind Side come out at that time. And so that kind of tore us up. We cried about that. And then I was at work just like a few weeks later and get online and just look up Dave Thomas Foundation. I felt God stirring something in my heart. And I decided, okay, I'm going to look at it. And then it just so happens that like a week or two after that, I looked at it, there was an adoption fair down in Plano, which is about 45 minutes from our house. And so coming, I tell you, I said, hey, don't take off and run with this. Remember that? And I said, but I got on Dave Thomas Foundation website and I found this adoption fair thing. And we're just going to go down there and get information. And then we're going to pray about it and see if this is the direction God wants for us. So we did. And we really kind of hit it off with one organization. As a matter of fact, there's some friends of ours now that have adopted from that same organization. But so then we start that process with them. And it was, I think from the time we started that until, I mean, kind of that whole end of the trying and then doing the seeking out adoption and training and all that, it was maybe closer to 2 years or so.
Before we got Braden, you mean?
Before we got Braden.
Okay.
And they tried to match us with a couple things. And we're like, look, we only want one kid. We've got a couple already. So,
well, and we didn't want to, if we did, originally we wanted to maybe do 2 siblings because of the age gap between Kyron
right.
and this one. And then we realized if we did 2, then that would take a lot of our time and resources to nurture and connect and all that. And we were like, we don't want to take all that away from, the boys.
And yeah, that's a whole path you could go down there. But so we finally got matched with Braden, and then we kind of doubt ourselves because they gave us this huge file, and a picture, and all we had was his medical file and his, I guess, from the social worker, and a picture. And we're supposed to make a decision because the way the organization worked is we had to decide, yes, we want him or no, we don't, before you ever get to meet him. And talk about a leap of faith. So we pored over this thing, we prayed over it, and then we're in my office, I still remember, we call and tell our caseworker over the phone, we've decided that we want to take Braden. And she said, well, we've just withdrawn you remember that?
Yeah.
And I said, what are you talking about? I asked you how long we had to decide. You said, take a couple weeks or whatever. I said, it's been a week. She goes, well, we're just reconsidering. And you started crying.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like going off. I'm like, how can you cannot do that. We've been, struggling and battling with this over in prayer. And we think this is what we're supposed to do. And this is what we're going to do. And I'm like, you go back into your meeting and you figure out what it's going to take, because we've been through too much to get to this point for you guys to go, we think we should reconsider. And so they said, fine, you can meet him. And I mean, it was literally like a week later, the next weekend, we were driving out to where he's from and met him. He spent the night.
Josh went with us.
Yeah,
we
Josh
went and spent the night in a hotel there.
Yeah.
And we had Chuck E. Cheese and we swam.
Yeah.
And
we took him back because he didn't want to spend the night.
Right.
And then
but then the next day he came here with us.
Yes, to spend the night and just kind of get to know us a little bit. And then we had to take him back. And it's a couple hour drive. And then
he had a week.
He had difficulty spending the night. And then
as
then
you would expect.
Yeah, a week later, we're going to pick him up for good, all his belongings and everything. And man, that was you're so excited to get the child, and the child's in a foster home. And at the time he was about to turn 4, right?
A week away.
He was a week away from turning 4. So we're all excited, and we've got like some toys and stuff. And of course he's hiding when we go in.
But remember, she said we were the only people that he had ever come directly to.
Right.
Usually he would hide behind her.
I mean, he did play with us even on that first visit. But then when we went to put him in the car and get him in the seatbelt, it's one of the worst things I've ever seen or experienced. I mean, just the heartbreak.
Well, the initial, yes.
And fear in him. I mean, we were like his 4th home in 3 years.
Correct.
And so he, screaming and crying for his foster mom. It was.
I think Josh cried.
Josh was crying.
Crying.
Yeah, we were all crying and just driving and trying to soothe him and turned on movies in the car and all that stuff. And it was tearful literally every day for a while. And I know this has gone long, but The reason we're sharing this is that we just want people to know. I mean, let you talk. What do you want people to know from this about marriage and
Mm. Well, I guess the first thing is that, we could have given up a long time ago. There's a couple of things prior to that this just happened to be the hardest. But, not giving up, like you said, we didn't love each other. We hated each other for a moment, but we still had the commitment of marriage.
And I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's a huge message to people too, is that, look, this isn't all about lovey-dovey romance and how you feel. It's not a feeling. Romance is a feeling. I tell people romantic love brings you together, but Christ-centered, committed love is what will keep you together.
Right.
And we made those decisions early on, and we stuck by those decisions and those commitments that we made. But that takes most people out.
Right. And we had a good support system, both of our parents. They went through their training with us. We had some really good friends in our church family at that time. I have learned, I actually just texted someone today saying that I have learned over the last few years that it takes a village to parent, and that it is not for just two people to handle by themselves. I feel like we'll have to do a couple more podcasts on from 4 years old to now.
Whew, yeah.
And maybe we'll have some of our friends come on.
We could,
because
because it is a different skill set, because there's a primal woundedness, and if you've adopted children, even if you get them as a baby, they know something is different, and especially if you're open about them being adopted, there's something different there. I call it the primal wound. I think that's based on a book that we read. Mm-hmm. We're big readers and trying to get prepared and tried so many things for bonding and all this stuff, but anyway, so now at that point, we're a night family of 5, and we both want you to know that no matter how hard it gets, you still remember when we were having one fight, that one in the closet that time, and we were yelling back and forth, and that one ended up, and you looked at me and you had tears in your eyes, and it still gets me choked up because how hurt you were, and I could tell you were really like it, and you just look at me and you said, "Are we going to make it through this?" And tears were just streaming down your face, and you remember what I said?
If this is as good as it gets, I'm here.
Yep.
Not going anywhere.
Yep. And it probably got worse after that. But our message is that no matter what you're going through, that having a partner that will commit and you guys will focus on God and His will for your life, that you can make it through anything. I firmly believe that.
Yep.
So, tough one today.
Yeah, I've been putting it off because I told him right before we got on, I said, it's hard to bring up that and then turn off the camera and go pick up kids and act like everything's great.
Get back to life. But
if it helps somebody, it's worth it. It's all good.
Yeah, and I'm always amazed at how when you share your story, people are like, oh my God, that's our story. And they've been hiding it or they're ashamed of it or whatever. There's no guilt, shame, worry, or blame. We're not better than anyone else. We've just made these commitments and stuck to them. And so thanks for coming on today. I know this is a tough one for you and you've been putting it off, and I love you. And if you love us and you love our content and you want to hear more of it, you can send us a message if you know us locally and stuff you'd like for us to talk about. Please like and share our content and tell other people. We appreciate it.
Oh, we love the comments that y'all make. That's very sweet that you take the time to comment and not just like it.
Yeah. So
thank you, Lydia.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Through the life worth living.